You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramée.
Hey guys, what is up? Welcome to your Wednesday and welcome to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. Mark Dailey here, welcoming you to this week's show. And it was a bit strange this past weekend. I must say that I really got into that first triple header in Formula One history. So to actually have a week off this past weekend was a little bit strange, but hey, we did have the World Cup final going on in Russia, so that was an acceptable way to spend the weekend if there was no Formula One. But of course, we do have the German Grand Prix and the Hungarian Grand Prix before the month is out. And then we head into that, 3.5 week Formula One summer break. And just a quick programming note that at the beginning of August, we're going to shut it down for a week or so as well. It's vacation, it's holiday time here in Canada as well. So we're going to catch our breath and enjoy the nice weather. I hope wherever you are listening today around the world, of course, my friends in the Southern Hemisphere are in winter. Up here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're enjoying summer, and summer has really kicked in here on the west coast of Canada in the past couple of weeks, especially I think more specifically, I'd say about the past 10 days, we're experiencing temperatures in the high 20s. And for me, it's just, it's perfect. It gets nice and warm, but it cools off nicely at night. Nice sunny blue skies, nice long days. And it is a lovely, lovely time of year. And just before we get into the show, I want to give a shout out to the new Twitter followers this week. Benjamin Fernay, F1 is Life 77, Lori Backer, James, Ida Sophie, and the Toyota Brotherhood. If you want to give us a follow on Twitter, you can do that. And our Twitter handle is, not surprisingly, at Scuderia Pod. Sorry, there we go. I can't even get our own Twitter handle right. It is Scuderia F1 Pod. So if you want to give us a follow or give us a shout on Twitter, by all means, I'd love to hear from other Formula One fans around the world, and always follow back. So plenty of stuff to talk about in Formula One this week, but I want to backtrack quickly before I get into the new news for this week, and just want to clarify a couple things from last week's show. And I had quite a few discussions specifically regarding the comments I made about Kimi Räikkönen's wife, who chimed in after the British Grand Prix. And I'm just going to paraphrase. I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but she had made a post on social media after the race, something to the effect of, well, if you can't take losing properly, or if you cry like a girl when you lose, go take up a ballet. Now, do I have a problem with Kimi's wife, Minttu Räikkönen, speaking up against Mercedes, who obviously were quite vocal that, Lewis, of course, stormed off after the race. He didn't stick around to do the post-race little interview there with Martin Brundle in the Parc Fermé. He sort of stormed off there. He said afterwards that he was so physically exhausted that he could barely stand, or whatever. And then also the Toto Wolff and also Niki Lauda were saying they're going on about this bizarre conspiracy theory that they have about Ferrari drivers driving into Mercedes cars, which I think is obviously those are pretty ridiculous comments. I think the only time that is completely valid is if we backtrack to Baku and the Azerbaijan Grand Prix last year, when Sebastian Vettel had that complete meltdown and drove into the side of Lewis under that safety car after he figured that Lewis Hamilton was brake testing him. But getting back to what Kimi's wife said, honestly, I don't have a problem with her speaking up, but the one issue I did have with her is that just making those comments that, if you cry like a girl when you lose, go and take up ballet. Honestly, and this is just my own personal opinion, those kind of comments where I come from in my part of the world are viewed as offensive and sexist. So whatever. Take it for what it's worth. That's just my 2 cents. If she had said something, they're just being poor losers and they should just shut their mouth and just concentrate to what's happening on the track. That would have been, at least in my eyes, a little bit more, I think, more appropriate. But of course, I mean, she's not the Formula One driver; it's her husband, and of course. Excuse me. And I deal with a lot of professional athletes, specifically professional footballers. And, some of them are more polished than not. And obviously, Kimmy's wife is not getting that media training. So she probably said something that maybe she regretted afterwards, or maybe she didn't. But at any rate, it's fine with me. If she wants to criticize Mercedes, I think that definitely that they deserved it for some of the things that they said after the race. And also, one of the comments was that I received from one of the listeners that if I was going to be so critical about Kimmy's wife, maybe I shouldn't be giving Lewis so much of leeway after he like I said, he stormed off after the race and barely acknowledged the other drivers in the little ante room that they have before they go up onto the podium. And it's funny that every time something goes wrong with Lewis, whenever we're watching a race, my wife will always say, well, Lewis didn't have a good day today. He's going to get out of the car, and if he's angry, he never takes his helmet off. And that's very true. But I do accept that criticism. If you're willing to dish it out on someone, maybe I shouldn't have been so lenient on Lewis's somewhat delayed apology for his behavior post race at the British Grand Prix. But hey, part of what makes this fun is the discussion that we have, and I enjoy talking about Formula One and discussing it with you guys, because I just sit here and talk about it. Honestly, it's a little bit difficult at times because, again, I'm hosting this show solo. Kevin is still just sort of wrapping up everything that happened for the World Cup, so hopefully he's back for next week. But I'm talking, I'm producing, I'm also going through my show notes, so I've got my hands full here. So talking is kind of something that almost becomes secondary. So sometimes it's easy when you're hosting a show on your own to lose track. But hey, that's just the way it is. Not supposed to be an excuse or anything, but let's get into the news that's out there right now. And Valtteri Bottas, I think I'm going to get into let's call it silly season, because although most of the teams and the drivers, if they're not set for 2019, that there's some pretty, I would say, some solid speculation as to where the final parts are going to go once everything sort of settles down and the game of Formula One musical chairs sort of, I don't know, completes itself for this year. Anyways, Valtteri Bottas is confident that his performances in 2018 are good enough to get a contract for 2019 and beyond with Mercedes. And well, I think he has done a pretty good job this year. He's out-qualified Lewis 4 times so far this year. He's had some rotten luck, of course. I mean, one was when Sebastian Vettel punted him off of the track at Paul Ricard at the French Grand Prix a couple of weeks ago. And then he had that rotten luck when he was leading the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and had a puncture very late in the race, and when it really looked like he was going to win that one. And Bottas, I think he's deserving of it. I was interested when he went to Mercedes at the beginning of the 2017 season after Nico Rosberg just decided to pull the plug and retire just literally days after the end of the 2016 season. I thought it was an interesting move by Mercedes, and of course they did the smart thing by giving him a 1-year contract with an option for 2018. And I think that Bottas was always, I think he was a handy driver. I think he did what he could at Williams, but definitely they didn't want to overcommit themselves, especially when you saw like the amount of drivers that were coming up out of contract after the end of each and every season made sense. But who are they going to replace him with? The big one obviously would have been Danny Ricciardo, or that would have been I think an interesting choice to partner Lewis Hamilton. Lewis, of course, is also out of contract at the end of the season, but the talk, the chatter has been that contract has just hasn't been, I wouldn't say a priority, but they haven't really been pushing it along. It's just kind of been what they've been saying, it'll get done when it gets done kind of thing, and it will get done. And I think, honestly, when it does get done, that'll probably, at least what I'm expecting, to be the last contract that Lewis Hamilton is going to sign in Formula One. So it'll be interesting to see when that is announced, how many years that is for. And I think that Lewis is that kind of guy that I think he's starting to look beyond his Formula One career, or at least preparing for it. I mean, he seems to enjoy a lot of different things away from racing, and I think that he wants to. What does he really have left to prove? I mean, he's a 4-time world champion. I mean, nobody's got more. Nobody's got more pole positions. I mean, he's won so many races and won so many honors over the course of his career. How much longer does he have to go on and prove it before he's satisfied that he's done what he needed to do in Formula One, and it's time to move on and try and challenge himself in other areas. But yeah, I think that maybe Ricciardo was a bit of a long shot, maybe to replace Valtteri Bottas. But I think that Ricciardo and Hamilton could be an interesting partnership. But why rock the boat? Hamilton and Bottas seem to get on pretty good with one another. Bottas seems to be a very good teammate. So why wouldn't you give him a new contract if you're the guys, if you're Toto Wolff and you're signing the contracts and the paperwork for Mercedes. Now, just talking about Danny Ricciardo, even he himself admits that Ferrari and Mercedes are no longer options for 2019. Mercedes, of course, we were just talking about, but Ferrari, that rumor is still out there that Raikkonen, who is 39, it's kind of hard to believe he doesn't really, well, at least for me, he doesn't look like he's 39. I mean, Kimi almost looks ageless to a certain degree. I mean, he was kind of a fresh-faced kid when he broke into Formula One with Sauber all those years ago, but I mean, at least once he sort of matured a little bit and grew up, and to me, he looks almost the same as he did now 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. Anyways, the speculation is that he will move on at the end of the year. They won't bring him back for 2019. And perhaps they will give that second seat to partner Sebastian Vettel to Charles Leclerc, who is, of course, a Ferrari driver currently driving for Sauber this year. And that is an interesting one because you look at the difference in quality between the two Sauber drivers, Marcus Ericsson and Charles Leclerc. It's night and day, really. I mean, Charles Leclerc is outperforming Ericsson on a weekly basis, not just in qualifying, but in the race itself with basically identical equipment. So I think that speaks a lot to Charles Leclerc's talent as a driver. And is he potentially one of the superstars of the future of Formula One? I think we've gotten a pretty good look at that this year. So it would be, I think, really exciting to see Charles in one of the top teams in Formula One and see what this young fellow can do. And it'll be exciting to watch him grow and get better over the years. And if he does go to a race for the Scuderia, it will be very, very interesting to watch. I mean, just the fact that he's even being mentioned as a possible replacement to Kimi Räikkönen, I find fascinating because that is just such not a Ferrari move. It's just not really a Ferrari thing to give a young guy a chance like that. They've never really done it in their history, and they've always, Ferrari basically has unlimited resources, so they're able to get the drivers that they want. And I think they still have a partnership with Philip Morris, even though they don't have the tobacco branding on the cars anymore. But I believe that they do sponsor the team or provide some funding. So anyways, that's not a concern for them. So, I mean, they've always been able to go out and get the guys that they want and not necessarily giving younger fellows the chance to develop themselves. But Charles looks like he's ready to go. He looks, I think, pretty solid out there for a guy in his first year in Formula One. So that's definitely one to watch as the year go on. So let's just take a bit of a different look here. I think obviously that the best scenario for Danny Ricciardo is to stick with Red Bull, and why wouldn't you? Obviously, next year is going to be, I think, an interesting year for Red Bull. Obviously, we've heard in recent weeks that they have decided to move on from Renault. That has been, sadly, a troubled relationship over the past 3 to 4 years in the turbo hybrid era. Of course, I don't know if you want to go as far as call it a legendary partnership, but the two, Renault and Red Bull, have definitely enjoyed a lot of success together over the years, winning championships and lots of races. So it'll be weird to see a Red Bull without a Renault, or in this case, a Tag Heuer branded Renault engine in the back. But that relationship has been strained, and Honda is obviously a gamble. I think they had that unique position of being able to evaluate both engines. Obviously, they have the Renault in the Red Bull, and then the Honda is the only supplying Toro Rosso this year. So, I mean, being a sister team to Red Bull Racing, they were basically able to compare the engine data one-on-one and really have, I think, a very privileged position to make the best decision for them. And Honda themselves have said that their goal is to maintain the current level where Red Bull is at this year. So, I think that's fair. I think that's okay for them. I think that's a good goal for them to set. Obviously, they're going to want to move beyond that as soon as possible. And I certainly hope that they don't regress, because we saw the last weekend at Silverstone that the Red Bulls were a distant fifth and sixth, really, behind the top four cars, the two Mercedes and the two Ferraris, and I believe they were down something like 80 horsepower, and that really shows. So it would be disappointing to see them regress from where they are right now, because they've provided some very good moments this year, and obviously Daniel Ricciardo's had some very good moments this year, and Verstappen in recent weeks as well. Seems that he's gotten his head in the right place finally, and doing what Max Verstappen should be doing, and getting podiums and contributing to that team. So that definitely, I think, would be disappointing, like I say, to see them regress backwards if Honda can't deliver with a good and strong power unit for next year. But let's move away from Ricciardo and Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull, and let's take a look at some of the other possible pairings. Force India, I kind of wonder. I think we're going to see Sergio Perez back there. I think that Sergio has had his opportunity to maybe get a drive with one of the big teams. I think that's passed him by. I think that possibility in his career is, sadly, I think that's come and gone. He had that one-off with McLaren in 2013. Wasn't really the best, but I mean, he's been pretty good, very consistent for not Toro Rosso, but for Force India over the past several seasons, and he's had some very impressive results there. Seems to do very good at Azerbaijan for whatever reason, but that seems to be a track, obviously, where he's had some success. And perhaps maybe he will not be lining up again next to Esteban Ocon in 2019. Ocon is actually being thrown around there as a possible driver for Renault next year. So if that's the case, who could possibly come in and take that second seat? One of the names out there being mentioned is George Russell. Williams, that is an interesting one. Sergei Sirotkin, apparently he's rumored to be bringing 15 million euros worth of sponsorship money to the team each and every year. And guys, that is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. And both Williams and Sirotkin's own people say that he's on a multi-year contract with Williams. So I would be surprised that if we saw a scenario play out where Sergei Sirotkin isn't driving for Williams next year. I mean, that's obviously a lot of money. I mean, obviously he hasn't had any success, hasn't scored a single point yet. And, I guess if he's bringing that much money, you give him a lot of leeway. And then also Lance Stroll, another young guy, he's in his second year with Williams. He also brings a fair amount of money to the team as well. Not sure exactly how much. The only thing I could find briefly when I was looking this evening was that it's supposedly a decreasing amount each and every year. So whether or not that happens next year, or whether or not Williams decide that they want to continue with Lance Stroll for 2019 remains to be seen. And if that's the case, does Robert Kubica draw in finally and get that second Williams seat? Maybe, maybe not. I think one of the interesting things I was reading in the past week or so is that what with the struggles that Williams have had this year, and obviously the pairing of Sirotkin and Lance Stroll is a very inexperienced one. You have a car where the aero package just is not good. The car is just severely, well, it's just bad. It's not a good car whatsoever. And if you have two guys as young and as inexperienced in Formula One like Stroll and Sirotkin, there is only so much that you can really maybe develop compared to if you're getting feedback from a more experienced driver. Kubica himself has said, well, a lot of the speculation is that if they were to dump one or the other of those two drivers, that he could draw in there, and that even though he is a more mature, older driver, that he very much considers himself a rookie for Formula One. So if, for those of you calling for Kubica to get one of those seats at Williams, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an upgrade, but, we'll have to wait and see. Anyways, Renault look for, well, I think probably we'll see Hülkenberg around there. And then the big question is, will it be Carlos Sainz, who is a Red Bull driver, and what with this whole Red Bull, Renault, Honda drama, is he kind of the guy left without a seat? Obviously, what with Renault and Red Bull dissolving their partnership, and he's loaned there. He's not even, he's still a Red Bull driver. And I think a lot of it has to do with what's going to happen with Daniel Ricciardo's contract with Red Bull, the big team. That seems to be a formality. So, I mean, most likely we're going to see a scenario of Danny Rick and Verstappen in 2019. And Esteban Ocon is the name that is being thrown out there that could be the second Renault driver next year. So does that mean that Carlos Sainz is perhaps left without a chair when the music stops playing? I mean, he still is a Red Bull driver, and you look, of course, they have the two teams, Red Bull Racing and Toro Rosso, which is the junior team, the development team. Is that somewhere where he could move back to and maybe partner up with Pierre Gasly? I think that what we've seen with Brendan Hartley, the young New Zealander, obviously that has not worked out very well. Brendan just does not seem to have what it takes in Formula One. He got a couple of races at the end of last year, and I'm not really seeing a lot of forward progression from Hartley at the moment. But on the flip side of that, Pierre Gasly, who had some good performances earlier in 2018, has kind of he's really cooled off in the past several races. So how much of it is the drivers, how much is the cars? But I would think that if anything, you're going to want to stick with Gasly and maybe move Sainz back. And if he doesn't go back to Toro Rosso, what other options does that really leave him? Of course, Haas is an interesting one. I think they'll probably stick with K-Mag. But Romain Grosjean, I mean, he's had a tough season this year. A lot of it was his own fault. I think that a lot of the criticism that Romain Grosjean is getting this year is absolutely deserved. So whether or not Haas decide to bring him back for 2019, great question. And if Sainz doesn't land with one of the other teams, could that be a possibility? Who knows? And then, of course, McLaren, this is almost becoming like an annual drama, although I think this year it's maybe less sort of a speculative, what with Fernando. I mean, even the whole Fernando Alonso and the whole McLaren IndyCar thing, that seems to really dried up in the past 10 days or 2 weeks or so. It was really seemed to be building quite a head of steam there about a month ago, and then it's really quietened down in the last little while. But the thing is, what's happening with McLaren themselves? 2018, they're at least on the same level of the 2017 car. The only difference is that they've got the more reliable and powerful Renault engine compared to the very underpowered and unreliable Honda engine that they had for the previous couple of years. But is Fernando going to want to stick around? He's now won 2 of the 3 legs of the Triple Crown. He's won Monaco a couple of times. He won at Le Mans last month. So the only thing that he has left to do is to win the Indy 500, and then he could be the second driver ever, besides Graham Hill, to win the Triple Crown. So I think Fernando himself even said immediately after winning Le Mans that Indy has top priority for 2019, and you can understand why. I mean, Fernando and Kevin and I, we've talked about it and referred to it a lot over the past year, that what Fernando Alonso did at Indy last year in 2017 was extremely impressive. He impressed all throughout the testing sessions, throughout qualifying, throughout the race itself, and that's why I think that it was a bit of a bitter moment when he had to retire, when his I think it was his engine blew up. I think they were almost about 3/4 race distance, and he was doing quite well. I mean, he wasn't leading at the time, but he was definitely in the conversation, and so disappointing. But honestly, why wouldn't you cheer to see Fernando pull it off? It's a very rare thing. Lots of guys have been able to win 2 of those 3 legs of the Triple Crown. Jacques Villeneuve is another one. He won Monaco and won the Indy 500, but never was able to get that third one at Le Mans. So it would be a very, very exclusive company, and I think that's what makes the whole Fernando Alonso story an interesting one to follow. But whether or not that story continues in Formula One next year, that's a great question. We will have to see. And does that mean that if he goes, Van Dorn stays, and then they're very keen to give Lando Norris, who is one of their junior drivers, a race seat? So could we see a Stoffel Van Dorn, Lando Norris partnership next year? Well, we're seeing now where you have 2 young drivers at Williams, and they're struggling with the car, that's not necessarily working out too much. I don't know how much better it could be for McLaren, who have stagnated at least to 2017 levels with this car, the MCL. What is it, 32, 33, whatever it is. The 2018 McLaren is at least on par with last year's car. And finally, Sauber. Well, it really seems like Charles Leclerc will go to Ferrari. So I think that Marcus Ericsson will be back again. He's another one of these guys that seems to bring a lot of money with him. He gets on very well with the owners and the management of the team. So I would think that as long as Marcus Ericsson has money, that he will be, or at least I think would be given full consideration for one of those seats. And then, if Leclerc goes, who gets that second one? Well, Antonio Giovinazzi, who we saw a couple of times last year when Pascal Wehrlein, who was injured to start the year, he had that nasty accident at the Race of Champions where was it, Miami last year? Somewhere like that, and he missed the first couple of races of the season. I think that Giovinazzi, he had his moments last year. He did have somewhat of an embarrassing spin on the track was damp there in Shanghai along the start-finish straight. I think he just went underneath one of those advertising hoardings or whatever it is and got onto a damp patch on the track and spun out. But anyways, he's going to get an outing in FP1 at the German Grand Prix this weekend. So perhaps that is a bit of foreshadowing. There was even some sort of speculation that maybe Kimi Räikkönen could go back to Sauber, but just like the rumor last week is that maybe he'll go to McLaren. I just, honestly, for a guy that's been at the top for so long and had some very good cars and been with some of the biggest teams in Formula One, I can't really see that. I can't see Kimi Räikkönen going from Ferrari going to McLaren or to Sauber at the back of the grid. That is something that logically does not compute with my brain, and I think that's maybe not the longest of long shots, but definitely a long shot, and I can't see it happening at any time soon. All right, well, let's move on. And one of the other news items that was out this week is that Mercedes believes that over the course of the triple header over the past 3 weekends, that they had the fastest car despite all the points that they lost. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton had a very good weekend at the French Grand Prix, won that race. Valtteri Bottas, of course, was taken out by Sebastian Vettel on the first corner, and what with the damaged floor that he had, I mean, he had a decent recovery drive. He didn't really fare as well as Vettel, who picked his way through the order much quicker and finished a lot higher in the final classification than Valtteri did. But still, both those cars were fast. And then going to Austria is where Mercedes had introduced a bunch of new upgrades, and they ended up having a double DNF, which was the first time that they've retired both cars through mechanical failure since 1955, 1956, whatever it was. It was a hell of a long time ago. And I think the only other time that we've seen in recent memory that we've had a double Mercedes DNF was at the Spanish Grand Prix in 2016 when Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton collided on the first lap in, what was it, turn 3 or 4, ended up in the gravel. And that was sort of peak Hamilton Rosberg animosity. So a very, very rare occurrence. But yeah, they do think that they have the fastest car, and it certainly looked like it. But again, at the British Grand Prix, that one got kind of a little bit turned up on their head. I mean, they looked like they were going pretty good, and then we had those safety cars, and then very much like we had in the Austrian Grand Prix, where Ferrari, who's become a little bit more proactive, a little bit more aggressive in their pit stop strategy, especially when circumstances change very quickly. I mean, Red Bull are the masters of the double stack under these safety car periods, but Ferrari, who over the years, and let's be honest, sometimes their race strategy, their pit stop strategy, just has not been the best one that they could have gone with. And Red Bull definitely a lot more adventurous, and as we saw in Shanghai earlier this year, that when they're on the ball, that they can sneak race wins away and make some things happen. Ferrari, I don't think they're anywhere like the Red Bull that way. I mean, they make those big, bold changes, but definitely they have taken some steps towards that. And I think that when you look at Mercedes in Britain and obviously in Austria, and boy, Lewis Hamilton was mad in Austria when they got those that strategy mixed up and didn't bring him into the pits. I mean, it was all academic in the end. Obviously, Lewis retired with a mechanical problem, as did Valtteri Bottas. But yeah, so interesting. I think it's a little bit hard to argue that they don't have the fastest car in Formula One. But I think Ferrari also have a pretty good argument that they are at least on par, and in some instances faster than Mercedes. But we've seen that all season long. We've seen it kind of go back and forth in each and every race weekend. The track seems either to be suited to Mercedes or it's suited to Ferrari, and we've seen on several occasions this year that it's even suited to Red Bull. I mean, you go back to Monaco in May, and Ricciardo was just flying in the entire weekend, and so was his teammate Max Verstappen, both of them setting down some very impressive lap times. And obviously Ricciardo just absolutely killing it in qualifying and just absolutely dominating everybody, setting a track record, the only guy I think to get into the high 1 minute 10s for a lap time, which is something that you don't see very often. But just to sort of wrap up this discussion here on the point loss and the fact that Mercedes believe that this triple header didn't really demonstrate how good the car is that they only managed 61 points, and they started all three of those races from pole position, and during that time over those three races they finished third out of the top three teams. Ferrari got 98 points over that 3-race span, and Red Bull even had a very impressive 65 points. So Mercedes obviously feeling that they can do better, and sometimes that's what they need. They need that motivation or some sort of
I don't know if it's a humiliation or embarrassment, maybe not, maybe just a feeling of inferiority that they're not performing to the level that they can. Maybe that's the way to explain it. I mean, we saw last year in 2017, they had that horrible weekend at Monaco, and then they had, I think it was like a week off in between before they went to Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, and during that time they basically worked 24/7, and then that was the point in the year where they really got it going. And I think we saw a good indication of it in Montreal last year. And that's the thing that really kind of worries me, because regardless, I think which driver you cheer for, I think that it's been a very, very refreshing and welcoming to see that every weekend seems to favor one of the top three teams over the other, and even the drivers within the team. And I think it would be a real shame if we didn't see that continuing for the rest of the year. Anyways, a little bit more Mercedes news. They are looking they've announced they're not looking to do it. They're actually going to go and do it. And they've implemented a big technical restructure for 2019. And that will see Aldo Costa step back from his role as Mercedes' engineering director. So Costa joined Mercedes from Ferrari in 2011, will become a technical advisor to the team. And that will allow chief designer John Owen to take over the engineering group that was previously headed by Costa. So performance director Mark Ellis has decided to retire from his position ahead of he's going on sabbatical sometime next year, and that means that chief vehicle dynamicist Loic Serra will take over his role, and James Allison will remain as a technical director, also another former Ferrari guy, with Owen and Ellis set to report to him. Now going from the front of the grid to the back of the grid, and we got a couple of stories here, sad stories about two storied and famous Formula One teams. And McLaren CEO Zach Brown said that he's all for Formula One's plan to implement a cap on spending, and it gives him optimism. These are the words that he used, for a return to form for his beleaguered team. And McLaren obviously has gone from bad to worse to some sort of subterranean pit that they're in right now. So Formula One, they wanted to introduce a cost cap of about $150 million per year starting from 2021, allowing for the independent teams, so say like your Williams, your McLarens, teams like that, to be able to compete with the big spenders. So your Mercedes, your Ferraris, and I guess maybe to maybe a bit of a lesser extent, Red Bull. I don't think they spend quite as much as say Ferrari or Mercedes, but compared to maybe the teams at the back, obviously Red Bull would be a bigger spender. So McLaren, they do have a healthy budget, but they just have not been able to get anything right. And there's been all sorts of speculation and discussion in the past couple of weeks, just with the way that the team is structured. It's just like, apart from blowing it all up, I guess the work that you have to do would just be monumental and almost glacial in the amount of speed that it would take to see changes if you sort of chip away at it bit by bit. But this kind of leads into another comment that was made by Gunther Steiner, who's the team principal at Haas F1. And he believes that each of the 7 teams that are not Mercedes, Ferrari, or Red Bull are all equally capable and have a very, I guess, equal performance and on the track. And he believes that any one of those 7 teams can be challenging for race points each and every weekend. So Haas has kind of been, I would think, the best of the rest. They had a very, very good opening weekend in Australia, till the point they had the pit stops in the race, and that pace and that the speed that they had sadly didn't get put to good use, because both of those cars retired when they had both their tires were not fitted correctly during their pit stops, and they had to retire from the race. So that was disappointing. But yeah, I think that they are the best of the rest. Renault haven't really had the I think they almost seem a little bit kind of flattened off in their march back towards being a race winner. Obviously, they're sort of in the middle of this multi-year, long-term project that they embarked upon when they bought Lotus a couple of years ago to get back to being one of the top teams in Formula One. So they're sort of halfway through that process right now, and they're also basically halfway in the middle of the grid. So I guess that would be, I guess that would make make a lot of sense. And also, Steiner went on to say that that points that have been lost this year through driver errors are completely unacceptable. And I think this is obviously more to do with Romain Grosjean. Kevin Magnussen has had a far better season and far more consistent season. He's had a couple of controversial moments here and there, but Grosjean has just had all sorts of, he's done some really stupid things, but he's also had some pretty bad luck. But they are all really add up to the same thing at the end of the day, that regardless if it's your own fault or not, they do have a car that should be challenging for points each and every weekend. And I think that Steiner would like to see them at least, I think he will, not just at least, but I think he'd like both cars to get into Q3 each and every race weekend. So I can imagine the frustration that he must be feeling when they're throwing points away through what's happening on the track. That's not even a fault of the team or a mechanical fault, but is rather of one of the drivers. Must be immensely frustrating. But just talking about points and throwing them away, Fernando Alonso is saying that the revised point system that Liberty Media, the commercial rights holder of Formula One, are proposing would lose what he's calling "quote unquote" miracle results, and so this would increase the amount of points that are awarded on a race weekend that go right now from the places 1 to 10. But would go from like 1 to 20. So that would be quite a change because, of course, you get 25 for first, 18 for second, 15 for third, 12 for fourth, 10 for fifth, 8th for sixth, 7th you get 6 points, 4 for 8th, 2 for 9th, and 1 for 10th. And Fernando, not a big fan of expanding those points beyond the current cut off at 10th where it is right now. I even remember when I was a kid, I think they only gave out race points for the first the top 6 drivers. So to go all the way from or to give everybody points at the end of the day, that's, I don't know, that's kind of almost like the participation ribbon that you get at your sports day when you're a kid growing up. It's just, you show up and you participate, you get an award for it. So I don't like that necessarily. I think that they should just award it. And I don't even see why they even really need to change it. I think that the current point system works. And I don't think that you should necessarily get points just because you show up each and every day. Obviously, some teams are going to struggle more than others. I don't think that Williams has scored a single point this year, or maybe they have. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'll check that here before the end of the show, but it definitely, I think, is something that they just shouldn't be giving away. So, I'm correct. It actually, Williams does have 4 points, but they're miles behind Sauber, who have 16. So not really a mile, but definitely if you're Williams, that's not really a lot that you can that you have, and I can't really see them getting up to 16 at any point in the near future. All right, well, now something that I thought was kind of I found it kind of what's the best way to put it? Interesting, amusing, shocking, maybe a little bit of all of the above. But a couple of days ago, Jacques Villeneuve, former Formula One world champion, said that his former team, Williams, is quote unquote dead. And they obviously, like we're saying, they're bottom of the constructors championship at the bottom. And they've gone from 3rd in the World Championship in 2014 and 2015, right down to the bottom of Formula One just in the space of a couple of years. So Villeneuve, he's an outspoken fellow, and he pointed the blame squarely at Claire Williams and basically said it was a mistake for her to be named as a team principal and to take over from her father, Sir Frank Williams. And Villeneuve, not a believer that they can bring it back or get back to even being competitive, let alone get back up to, say, as high as third in the Constructors' Championship. So a very dire prediction from Jacques. But over at Williams themselves, Paddy Lowe, who's been there for a couple of years. Obviously, Paddy used to be one of the main guys at Mercedes, and he's saying that the recovery to get Williams back to becoming a competitive team is his greatest challenge. So they've got so many problems there and so many questions that need answering. One of the problems that they have is that the way that the aerodynamics on the car has, it doesn't give Lance Stroll or Sergei Sorokin the confidence to really push and drive the car to maybe its full potential, use all the speed that they have, because we saw both of them spin out in qualifying at the British Grand Prix because the way that the aerodynamics work, and it's a completely different philosophy to the aerodynamics that they've been using in previous years, and they're getting this stalling effect over the back wing, and that's the reason why both of them crashed at Silverstone last week. All right, well, let's take a quick look now at the German Grand Prix this weekend. It's at Hockenheim, and I'm still not really a big fan of the new Hockenheim. The last time, or the only time that I've been to Hockenheim is quite a number of years ago. I'm thinking probably 15 years ago. I think it's right before they modified the track and cut down all the trees in the forest there and came up with this new, smaller, more condensed circuit rather than the old one where they would come out of that long back straight out of the forest and come into that little twisty section in the stadium, and then back onto the start finish straight, and then that 90-degree corner, and then head way back off into the forest again. Obviously not great for the spectators who are there, and I think obviously it's probably more, I think, suitable or appropriate in its current format for modern Formula One. There's more grandstands. There's the circuit isn't completely isolated, and it's not in the middle of a forest like it was for the longest time. But still, it seems like it's a tale of two Hockenheims. And I think when I was there for that DTM race, that was probably pretty close to the time where they started the improvements to what they have now. So it'll be a 67 lap race. It's a 4.574 long kilometer course. The race distance is 306.458 kilometers. The lap record was set in 2004 by Kimi Räikkönen, who set as 1 minute 13.780 seconds. And this is the first German Grand Prix that we've had since 2016. Lewis Hamilton won that time, and even we didn't have a German Grand Prix in 2015 either. So it's been a little bit hit and miss over the past number of years there, and obviously Hockenheim and the German Grand Prix, they're trying to renegotiate with Formula One to get a more favorable deal. It was just becoming more and more costly to host the race there under the terms and conditions that had been laid down by Bernie Ecclestone. So they are definitely trying to get a better deal worked out for themselves on that one. Now, if you look at some of the characteristics about the track, it's a 3 according to the Pirelli Autosport graphic. So 1 being the lowest, 5 being maximum. So tire stress is a 3, lateral G forces are a 3, asphalt grip is a 3, downforce is a 3, and it's not a super abrasive track surface, and that is ranks a number 2. So the tires that Pirelli have made available for this race are the mediums, soft, and super soft tires. And if you look at the top teams, Hamilton and Bottas have taken more ultra softs rather than the soft tires. Bottas has only opted for 1 set of the white medium compound. Hamilton has taken 2. And actually, Vettel and Räikkönen are also very similar to the Mercedes drivers on their tire selections. Vettel and Hamilton have made the same selections on the numbers of soft, mediums, and ultra soft tires. And then also Räikkönen is opted for the same as his countryman Valtteri Bottas. Verstappen and Ricciardo at Red Bull are taking more ultra soft compared to the soft tires, and as you get further down the grid there through the other teams, everybody's loading up on the ultra soft tires. So we'll see what results that brings this weekend. Anyways, that should be interesting to watch, and should be a very, very exciting race. I don't even know who to predict might come up on top. Obviously, each and every race, it really depends. Is the Mercedes more suited to this one? Is it going to be Ferrari? Is it going to be Red Bull? We'll just have to wait and see. But since we had a week off, I'm just going to remind you guys quickly of the latest or the most recent standings in the Drivers' Championship. On top is Sebastian Vettel with 171 points, Lewis Hamilton in second with 163, Kimi Räikkönen in third with 116 points, Danny Rick in fourth with 106, Valtteri Bottas in fifth with 104 points, and then Max Verstappen rounding out the contenders, although he's quite a ways behind Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton with 93 points. Now, just taking a quick look at the Constructors' Championship. Currently, it's Ferrari on top with 287 points, Mercedes in second with 267 points, and Red Bull Racing not really all that far behind considering the results that they've had this year. They're still in with a bit of a shout, although they're substantially further behind Ferrari than they are Mercedes, but Red Bull have amassed I'd say a very impressive 199 points in the Constructors' Championship so far this season. All right, guys. Anyways, I think that's a good place to wrap it up now. I'm just looking here at the timer on my recording software here. I've gone on for now over 50 minutes on my own, and my throat is definitely starting to feel a little bit hoarse, a little bit worse for wear. So I think this is a good place to leave it. Anyways, thank you all very much for listening, downloading the show. If you want to do us a big favor and help us grow the show, one of the easiest and best ways to do that is to leave us a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform that you use to download and enjoy your podcast from. And Kevin and I would certainly appreciate that. If you have any feedback or comments, easiest way to get in touch with us is via email at scuderiaf1pod@gmail.com, or throw a tweet my way at scuderiaf1pod. Anyways, I really need a drink of water, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you again this time next week.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.